Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending where you're joining me from. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rafe. I'm the Director of Intelligence for the Secureworks Counter Threat Unit, and today I'm going to be talking to you about understanding adversary in the middle, AiTM, tactics, and credential theft more generally. So we're going to start off with some definitions. Adversary in the middle attacks, generally speaking, are a form of cyber attack where the malicious actor intercepts and potentially alters the communication between two parties without their knowledge. That's the broad definition of adversary in the middle, formerly known as man-in-the-middle style attacks. Increasingly, we see a specific subset of these types of attacks known as adversary in the middle phishing attacks. And in this case, the adversary, often using email or a messaging service, creates the conditions for them to be in the middle of that communication stream and intercept and manipulate communications between a user and the legitimate service that user is trying to access. So how do adversary in the middle attacks work more generally? There's a number of different techniques that can be used to achieve that middle position in a communication stream. For most cases, these sort of attacks are done locally to the victim, because trying to do them on the internet can be more difficult unless perhaps you're an advanced nation state actor. But generally speaking, you can use techniques like network spoofing, sending the right kind of packets to someone's system to redirect their traffic through yours and then onto whatever the real destination should be, tampering with network routing on that network. So again, traffic is routed through your host, and you maybe have a sniffer or sort of packet capture device. And similarly, the use of proxy servers. And in some cases where the traffic is not already plain text, you may need to use a particular type of service known as SSL or TLS stripping. And what that does is it breaks the end-to-end communication between the user and the legitimate service that they're trying to communicate with, and puts the adversary, the attacker system, in the middle of that, and then has a connected session between the user and the adversary system, and the adversary and the end system, allowing the adversary to view the traffic in plain text. So while I said this is relatively rare to see from a network perspective, we did have a case that we responded to that did involve a network-based adversary in the middle attack. And in this case, we do believe that a nation-state actor was behind it. What we see on the screen here is a fairly sort of standard view of a network. You have a corporate perimeter, there's some internal routers, there's the perimeter firewall. Outside of that corporate perimeter is the perimeter router that the company uses to access the internet. You have the wider internet, and then a remote router at the destination. So generally what should happen is communications will flow out of the corporate network across the internet and to that remote router, as demonstrated by the email icon flying across the screen just there. However, in this incident, the attacker targeted the perimeter router used by this company, and was able to gain access to that router by brute forcing SNMP community strings, and that gave them the ability to modify or read and modify the configuration on that router. The technical details here are not super important, but the bottom line is they were able to use built-in functionality within the router to mirror traffic that was passing through that router to an IP address that they controlled. So in addition to the traffic flowing through the router from the internal system to wherever the data was supposed to go, they were able to take a copy of that and redirect it to a system that they controlled. And they could go further on this with some additional configuration changes to make all the traffic from that router flow through a host that they controlled, and conduct some of those adversary in the middle attacks that we discussed. So now what the situation looks like is something like this. When that traffic is flowing through all those devices, it's flowing through the compromised perimeter router. The adversary has that middle position on the communication flow. And what happens is that in this case, they receive a copy of the communication. If they had modified the router in a different way, they could receive the entire communication flow, run it through their own host, and tamper with it, or extract things like sensitive credentials or any plain text, and potentially, if they did some additional configuration, encrypted communications. But generally, the way we see this attack manifest is through phishing. So those attacks on routers and other sort of network-based attacks, while they do occur, and certainly perhaps some of the most frequently occurring situations would be in a red team or pen test exercise within a corporate network. What we tend to see in the real world is the use of that adversary in the middle tactic being used for phishing campaigns. So how does an adversary in the middle campaign differ from a traditional phishing campaign? In a traditional phishing campaign, you've got a phishing page, usually part of a phishing kit. So the threat actor, the criminal, may have bought this from an online marketplace, and it provides them all the bits and pieces that they need to conduct this sort of attack, including this sort of fake login pages. So they will phish. They will send an email with a link and some sort of pretext for a user to click that link to the targeted user. The user will open that email. They will read the message, and if they believe whatever the pretext that is in that email, they will click that link, and they will be directed through to an authentication page like this. Often, the sort of pretext or message used in a phishing campaign like this might be you need to view an encrypted document that's online, or you've been sent some document on a document sharing service, and you click that link, and then you sort of expect to hit some sort of authentication page before you can get that item, whatever it might be. And so they provide this fake interface for you to put your credentials into. So these credentials capture the username, password, multi-factor authentication tokens. In some cases in the past, certainly that was one of the things that would be taken as an offline field. And then the threat actor will reuse those credentials at some later stage. So if we just look at how that sort of plays out, you've got the user, they receive that phishing email, they click on that link directs them to the malicious phishing page, and then ultimately their credentials are captured by the malicious adversary. So if we compare that to an adversary in the middle phishing model, what we see is the user receives a phishing email, so same kind of beginning. They click on that link, but in this case, the link will take them to a page, and sometimes there can be multiple pages, there can be redirections, but the connection will be directed through a reverse proxy, an intermediate system that can then view the traffic between the user and the end service. And usually what happens is that the middle piece there around the proxy will be part of a tool or a framework that will establish a tunnel to the remote site, and the user will actually be viewing the real remote site through this tunnel. But the proxy in the middle gives the adversary the ability to view the user's traffic as well. And so the user will go ahead and authenticate. They'll put in their username, password, their multi-factor authentication code, and when they do that, the remote system will authenticate them, and assuming they got everything right, will issue them with a session token of some kind, a persistent token that will sit on their system that will tell the site or service that this is a legitimate authorized user. They've been through the authentication process. They know their password. They have access to whatever the multi-factor authentication token is and has successfully completed that stage. And so you end up with this authenticated token that can then be stolen by the adversary because they can view the end-to-end transactions. And the way these kits work is they tend to automate all this. So there's very little for the threat actor to actually do beyond initiating the phishing campaign and waiting for the results to come in. And as I mentioned before, because of the way these things work, you can create them, particularly if you use a sort of a typo spoofing, so a domain name that the threat actor has registered that looks very similar to the real legitimate service. You can create a certificate on there, so the connection between the user and the proxy will appear secured. The user will see the little padlock icon or similar on the browser to tell them that that's an encrypted connection, that their details, that their credentials are being sent over, and give them that reassurance, at least in theory, that their connection is secure. Actually, what's happened is that there is a tunnel built between the user and that middle system, and then the middle system and the end service. And it's because it's broken into two parts rather than one continuous tunnel, the threat actor has that middle system, that proxy that can intercept those details and capture the sensitive credentials, including the authenticated session cookie. So why are credentials valuable to threat actors? Well, obviously they are the things that we use to access the sensitive services that maybe we use for work on a daily basis, maybe our personal email, maybe our bank accounts, whatever it might be. There's a whole range of secure and sensitive services that are authenticated using usernames and passwords, and increasingly these days, multi-factor authentication, particularly for corporate systems. So this kind of attack enables the theft of those session cookies, and there are a variety of monetization options for criminals once they've stolen those session cookies. So for example, business email compromise, and I will talk through some examples of this having happened in cases that that Secureworks has responded to. Data theft extortion is another big category of crime that's pretty prevalent these days, and you have a variety of groups. So, for example, the elements of the Gold Harvest or Scattered Spider group have been known to use this approach in order to capture authenticated session cookies and use them to access targets. And lastly, ransomware. And these things aren't necessarily exclusive. You can have business email compromise, data theft extortion, and ransomware in the same overall attack if the threat actor decides that they want to use all of those options. And of course, they can do anything else they want to once they have authenticated access to your environment. Lastly, in some cases, some criminals are just doing this in order to get the access and sell it on to others via the dark web. And there are marketplaces dedicated to selling authenticated stolen access to people who don't want to go to the effort of conducting this kind of scheme themselves. They just want to buy that access and then move straight on to business email compromise, data theft extortion, ransomware, whatever it might be. So how do people go about setting up these types of attacks? Well, unfortunately, there are a number of very easy to use ready-made toolkits for this kind of activity. Evil Jinx is one of the most popular. It's often used by red teams and penetration testers to test the security of company networks, and that's great. Obviously, tools like this can also be abused by threat actors, and as I mentioned, Gold Harvest, Scattered Spider is one of the threat groups that has abused this and may continue to abuse this. We've seen Russian groups using this, so Iron Frontier, also known as Callisto, or Cold River, or Star Blizzard. So state-sponsored groups also using these tools in order to conduct this kind of adversary in the middle phishing. And you can see on the screen there, it kind of gives you a breakdown of what the tool does. It's used for phishing login credentials, along with session cookies, allowing people to bypass that multi-factor authentication protection. So the tool itself isn't necessarily complete. In addition to the tool, you need what Evil Jinx refers to as a fishlet. So it is a module that is customized to a particular end service. And there are other people out there who will write and make available these fishlets or modules that are tailored towards specific services. So you see on the screen there a number of popular online services that are targeted or can be targeted with this tool. Now, I'm sure that the creators of these tools and fishlets will argue that they are there for educational purposes or for legitimate security testing with the permission of the targeted organization, but you can see how they are also wide open for abuse. And to go a step further, if Evil Jinx wasn't powerful enough for some of these adversaries, there is an additional tool known as Evil Go Fish, which combines a phishing framework known as Go Fish with Evil Jinx into one sort of super tool, enabling this whole process to be done through one tool rather than having to run a separate phishing campaign in order to direct people at your Evil Jinx infrastructure. There are a number of other tools that have been used by threat groups and others out there. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce this, but Morena is one, and Modlishka is another. And there's a number of online services that criminals sell through the dark web or underground forums that can also be used for these purposes. And sometimes these are sold as services, sometimes they're sold as standalone kits. Prices usually range from a few tens to a few $100s to buy these services or software packages. So now we're going to look at a recent campaign that threat hunters within Secureworks looked at and were able to uncover and intercept at an early stage within our customer base. So this happened within the last few months. It was a Microsoft 365 focused adversary in the middle campaign, leveraging a tool known as Axios. So Axios isn't one of the tools that I've already mentioned. It's not a purpose-built adversary in the middle toolkit. It is actually a legitimate HTTP client for browsers and based on Node.js. So threat actors leverage the ability of this tool to intercept and transform requests and response data, which give them basically the same capabilities as some of those other toolkits that we previously talked about. So they could conduct adversary in the middle attacks using an Axios-based infrastructure. They'd set up their own proxy, they set up some landing pages, and they used Axios as the automation framework in between. So the victim will receive a phishing email, and in this case, the threat actors had used a legitimate online service to host something that looked like a document. So the user gets the email, they click on the link, they go to this online service, and they see this document. It says, "Document's been shared with you securely. Please click on the item below to authenticate and decrypt." This is a very common pretext, a very common scenario for phishing campaigns. If you were to click on that link where it says "View online" or "Download," you would actually be directed to the page that's highlighted in yellow in the code extract on the other side of the screen. So the target is then directed to this page, and this is a threat actor controlled domain, which is the sort of front end to this adversary in the middle phishing operation. So the way it works is the attacker sends that phishing email with a fake Microsoft 365 login link to the user. User clicks on that, enters their credentials, including their multi-factor authentication token. Maybe it's a token from an app, whatever it might be, into that fake login page. Those credentials are captured and relayed using Axios to authenticate with the Microsoft 365 service. A session token is returned and again captured with Axios automation, and the threat actor then gained persistent access by authenticating with that stolen access token. And I don't have it in this presentation, but we could see this in the authentication logs. Initially, a legitimate user agent string. So the user agent is what identifies the software that is connecting into a service. So instead of a browser, well, initially as a browser user agent, and then it switches over to being an Axios specific user agent, as we'll see in a minute. So in each incident involved in this campaign, the threat actors appear to be trying to conduct business email compromise. And this is a catch-all term for a range of attacks that includes everything from actual compromise of email accounts, where the threat actor then goes through those accounts and tries to find information of interest or invoices or other in-flight sales transactions that they can manipulate in order to redirect a payment into their account. There are other variations of this: CEO fraud, invoice fraud, those kind of things. But we see a lot of business email compromise style attacks, and we have developed a range of detections to spot the early technical signs of these attacks taking place. So in this case, the Secureworks Taegis XDR business email compromise detector alerted to the creation of inbox rules created to hide and delete email messages from the inbox folder. And threat actors will do this in order to hide communications that would otherwise alert to the victim to malicious activity. Often these are then moved to things like the deleted email, deleted items folder, junk folder, or the things like the RSS feed, somewhere that the user is unlikely to look on a regular basis to see these hidden messages. And these messages can be things from, I mean, it depends on the nature of the scenario. It might be they're trying to hide real messages from a supplier or a customer, so that they can manipulate the conversation from that compromised inbox, but not have the real user see any responses from the customers or suppliers. It might be even security notifications that user may be receiving saying there's been some suspicious activity on your account. It just really depends, and the threat actor can respond dynamically to what's coming into to that inbox. And as I mentioned before, in this particular case, rather than seeing the user authenticating with their legitimate browser user agent, we could see that the user agent of Axios /1.7.2, that was the version used in this case. There are potentially other versions that may be used in this kind of attack. So starting off by looking for perhaps Axios-based user agent strings is a first place to start if you are hunting for this type of attack in your own authentication logs within your own environment. But certainly that was a good giveaway in this particular campaign. And it's these sort of things that we look for, these sort of minor technical details that can then be capitalized on to detect these types of attacks at scale. So who was ultimately behind this campaign? With these sort of things, it's very difficult to track back to threat groups like we do in some forms of cybercrime or state-sponsored activity. Often they're just campaigns are too short-lived. They target so many customers and other entities around the world, and the infrastructure is used for a particular campaign and then disappears. Because we saw a number of inconsistencies in the post-compromise actions across multiple cases, we assessed that there's probably multiple actors performing this particular campaign. There was a lack of shared infrastructure, although they were in general coming from the 212.18.104.0 IP range. There were multiple connections from that IP range. So again, I'm sure there's plenty of legitimate activity in that IP range, but it may be one to look for if you want to go hunting in your own authentication logs. Combining that with perhaps alerts for anomalous authentication activity, maybe some impossible travel type alerts, those sort of things may give you a hint that that there's been a compromise of authenticated session cookies, particularly if you're seeing impossible travel type alerts combined with otherwise authenticated sessions. Sometimes in post-intrusion activity like this, we see the use of legitimate third-party applications to facilitate the harvesting or the theft of email. So in past business email compromise attacks, we've seen EM client and perfect data being used to harvest email from the compromised accounts in bulk. The threat actor will then go away and triage those emails, looking for opportunities to conduct additional fraud. So how do we stop these kind of attacks? What can we do? So when it comes to phishing in general, we're always talking about multi-factor authentication, and that is still absolutely necessary, but not always sufficient. So we do need to give some additional thought to how we can mitigate against these particular adversary in the middle type scenarios where they have relatively sophisticated tooling that can capture authenticated session tokens from those sessions. There's technologies known as conditional access policies. So in addition to having your multi-factor authentication, you can also say, or the sign-in request must meet some additional identity-related attributes. So they must be in a particular user or group. They must come from particular IP locations. Maybe the device has to be matching a particular fingerprint. There's a number of additional attributes that can be layered on top of the multi-factor authentication in order to allow that user into the network or access to whatever resource they're attempting to authenticate to. And this can be a great way of weeding out those attacks when they are successful, because the threat actor will not necessarily then be able to meet the other conditional access policy attributes if they have been set well, even though they have an authenticated session token. And the other option to consider is using phishing resistant MFA. So I won't go into this in detail, but phishing-resistant MFA is another set of more modern protocols and technologies, things like FIDO that can be used to add additional layers of protection on top of that multi-factor authentication. There can be making sure that the requests and the access are coming from specific devices, and that users have taken purposeful actions in order to initiate that session and conduct that authentication. So it's a phrase to go away and Google if you're not familiar with it, and look up the options there. It's supported by a number of major technology providers and increasingly more well supported as time goes on. In terms of detecting these kind of attacks, they can be tricky. So first off, I always think you need to be informed. It starts with threat intelligence. Indicators can be useful, but are often short-lived, usually just useful for the duration of a campaign, although they can be useful to go back and hunt to see if one of your users has been a victim of these particular campaigns. Again, perhaps in conjunction with other types of anomalous authentication alerts that you might be receiving. In terms of best practices, obviously we've talked about multi-factor authentication. In addition to that, you need to have network monitoring and anomaly detection, particularly around authentication events, but also perhaps looking at where people are coming from, which resources they're accessing once they've accessed a remote access service. And lastly, employee training and awareness. So making people aware of these types of attacks, these types of capabilities. Conducting those phishing simulations can be really useful. Getting people used to being a little bit suspicious about the emails that they're receiving, giving them an easy process that they can follow to report any suspicious emails that they might be receiving, so the security team within the organization can get an early heads up that somebody may be targeting their users. Technical solutions, email filtering, obviously, would like to think that that these sort of phishing attacks will be filtered out by email, and a lot of them will be. Depending on how persistent the actor is and how specifically they've targeted your organization, there are things they can do to try and make their email look very benign and credible, and get past filtering technologies, in which case you want to make sure that there is a broad suite of endpoint detection response, network detection response, and ultimately all of that brought up into an XDR type solution. So you have broad visibility over what's going on your network, on your endpoints, on your network, and any cloud-based services that you use, particularly from an authentication perspective. So that stack will give you a significant amount of protection, and where protection fails, early detection capabilities, so you notice these things before they get out of control. So lastly, and if you enjoyed what we were talking about today, I would encourage you to sign up for the Secureworks Global Threat Intelligence Summit. It is happening 3rd of October. It's coming along real soon. The theme for the summit this year is navigating the cybersecurity labyrinth from data to defense. We have an excellent lineup of talks. You can visit the short link there. You can scan the QR code, or if you don't trust either of those things, you can go to our website and sign up there. Absolutely encourage you to do that. We'll dig into more of the adversary in the middle type attacks, and a range of other state-sponsored and cybercrime activities will be on the agenda. Okay, that's everything I have for you today, content-wise. I think we have some time for additional questions. I'm just going to see what's been coming in. So what are the potential consequences for businesses and individuals if an adversary in the middle attack successfully compromise their session cookies and credentials? So as I said in the presentation, there are a number of outcomes. I mean, that authenticated session cookie will give them access to your remote access service or your cloud-based service that you might be using, whether it's things like Office 365, other cloud-based services. They can then authenticate as an authenticated user, gain access to that user's files, do things within that user's permission context. And they can then decide how they want to abuse that access, whether they're going to use it to move further into the network, lateral expand and try and achieve some sort of position of network dominance, or if they just want to deploy cryptocurrency miners or steal data or go into a sort of business email compromise model. We seem to see a lot of these adversary in the middle attacks coupled with business email compromise. So that tends to be the common model. One more here. So can we expect this type of attack to be improved with AI? I think that the tooling at the moment for these types of attacks is pretty slick and effective. What we are likely to see, and I think anecdotally we are seeing, is an improvement in the level of phishing emails that people are sending, and perhaps the sort of breadth and scale of campaigns. Obviously, AI in cybersecurity is a hot topic for everyone, and we are constantly on the watch for how it has been used or how it has been discussed and investigated by cybercrime adversaries and state-sponsored adversaries. So yeah, I would absolutely expect that people will be looking out for ways to use AI technologies to enhance and expand the scale of these types of attacks. Okay, well, thank you. I think that is all the time we have today. Really appreciate you joining us, and hope you enjoyed that. Please go and sign up for the Threat Intelligence Summit. Thank you very much.